Welcome to the Keeping IT Real podcast. This podcast features honest and transparent conversations about what it takes to manage corporate technology and expenses today. Each episode, listen to true and personal stories from IT professionals who are working hard to make sure their business stays connected and competitive. I'm your host, Jethro Castillo, and let's meet our next guest.
Today, I am joined by Puneet Bhargava, a Senior Director of Global Retail IT. With over 15 years of experience leading teams of over 100 and integrating innovative technologies into business operations, Puneet has a proven track record of driving impactful results and sustainable growth for his clients. Puneet, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So, let's start the way all good things start from the beginning. How exactly did you get started in the world of IT?
Growing up, computers were just getting introduced in general. This was like late 90s. And during school, we had one of the subjects as computer science. And what caught my eye was the basic language, which I think is now in the distant past, if you will. So I created my first program that was adding two numbers. And that was the most exciting and exhilarating feeling I got. Like, oh, wow, this is magic. I don't have to do the mental math and gymnastics of adding numbers and finding averages. So that's what caught my fancy. And it's been history since. So I just took it upon myself to learn, the various languages and programming. That got me hooked up. From there, I went into looking at the various business issues in the real world and how computers could be applied. So one of my claim to fame back in the day during my engineering days was creating a cathode ray oscilloscope using a computer. Because back in the day, and I think even now, these scientific instruments are pretty expensive. So how can you use the computer in a multi-purpose fashion? So created that, developed the software for it, and that was pretty well appreciated, got some accolades for that. And, that's what kept me going in this field.
Oh, so it was really love at first sight. And then
that's right.
Just took it all the way. I mean, I would ask, do you still kind of have the same love for it as you did when you first discovered it? Is it still just as strong as it was then?
Yeah. So in my free time, my hobby is still, playing with tech. So IoT has been a passion of mine. My house has a lot of automation with different stuff. I'm tinkering with like 3D printers and this, that, and other, and trying to connect the various aspects of living, if you will, and integrate that into the house chores, if you will. So yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome. Actually, that's so cool. I'm just imagining you walk in and it's like Tony Stark just with Jarvis and just the whole house.
Well, if I had those deep pockets, probably.
I got you. I hear you now. But obviously, you're more of in a manager role now, a director role. So you kind of do less of sometimes what you would say the fun stuff and more of the directing and managing. I don't know how you feel about that or talk about that. Do you miss it? Was it a natural transition? Talk about that a little bit.
Sure. No, that's a great question. If I reflect back on my inner child, I definitely miss being hands-on on tech. And that's why the man cave that I talked about at home, right? In terms of, on the professional front, what I really enjoy doing and what my past background has helped me achieve is looking at client issues and marrying solutions for those issues with technology, not for the sake of it, but how can technology be a cost-effective and have that human interaction, human machine interaction? How do you drive that with ease? And looking at the overall solution in that aspect is what I enjoy doing the most. And my current role, enables me to do that, because if you think of, digital transformation and so on, right? Our world has evolved drastically in the world of digital. And if you look at tech companies, they are on one end of the spectrum. If you look at some of the legacy companies is how I would describe them. Those that have chosen, for whatever circumstances, not to invest in tech on the other end of the spectrum. I find it really interesting how some of these laggards are beginning to get into that world of digital and how they can drive a much more compelling experience for their customers as well as, their employees. So those are the kind of solutioning and problem solving that I do more of in my current role now.
It's fun that you have this passion, but you almost have a bigger passion of being able to share that with the world. So you're like looking at the laggards, like you said, and go, oh, you see now how technology can help them.
That's right.
And so you want to help them because you know that it could change.
That's right.
How they do it, which is awesome. I think that's awesome. So, what exactly does your day-to-day look like then, as your current role?
Yeah. You know what? I would describe my current role probably in three parts. Part number one is the people management aspect. It's a given. You have a team. You have to make sure everyone's doing well on the team. They're happy. They have the right level of support, and they're also moving the ball forward for the company, right? So that's the people management aspect. The second component is driving the strategy for our business through the technology lens. So having conversations with the business team to say, what are the pain points from a day in the life perspective, typically mostly focused on operations, but then also looking at the crystal ball and into the future to say like, hey, where do we want to be in a year from now, in 2 years from now, right? So having both a immediate, midterm, and long-term view of how, as a technologist, I'm helping the business and move the needle for the business is the second major component. And the third major component is I have a pretty large transformation going on here at my current employer. And that involves changing the point of sale system across 4,000 of our stores. So that is another major component that at least today takes a good chunk of my time.
And that kind of brings me into my next question, at least that third point. How do you, and I think it's tied with your second point too, really, how do you decide what IT initiatives you prioritize and do and which ones you don't, especially when resources are limited? I think I'm hearing the answer a little bit, which is business alignment. But even then, you still have to decide out of all of the business desires, how you make that all fit. So how do you kind of prioritize that for your team?
100%, right? So, the short answer is focus on value, right? But there can be many competing priorities, even after focusing on value, that all of them deliver value, but like, hey, you only have, like you said, that much capacity. So, at the end of the day, it comes down to when you have competing priorities, it's a game of setting the right expectations with the business team and aligning on them. And if, for example, I see that there is this foundational engagement that we should move forward with because in a year or in 6 months, it will help unlock 5 other things from a business point of view. That's when I influence and convince the business team to move forward with something like that, even though in the short term, right, the perceived value of that thing is not as high. So at the end of the day, it's about, aligning with the business team and setting the right expectations and doing what's right for our business.
Oh, it's not just receiving what the business is saying. You also have a stake in the business, right? You know what you want. So it's not just being that order taker. It's going, oh, this actually can lead to these business outcomes, which is why I think you should do this. So it requires the knowledge of business too.
It's a partnership. Absolutely.
Yeah, it is a partnership, which is so interesting. That being said, if you had, a lot of the things you do is in alignment with the business, right? But also I would imagine that you personally and for the team have personal desires that if you had unlimited resources, you would do that. So you would make it easier for your team to work with. But of course you have to prioritize business alignment. let's
sure.
say we're in
Yes.
dream world, right? Ideal land, and you had unlimited resources and you didn't have to prioritize and triage. What are some of the things that you would do if you could do it and be like, that would really help my IT team, but it
Yeah.
really isn't prevalent enough for the business for me to even really.
Right. No, that's a great question. I say that because with the way the world of technology has evolved, right? And I'll go back to my comment about the continuum, where if you are in the tech sector, you are way out there, cutting edge. If you're in a legacy model, you are way far away from that, right? Traversing that journey, especially if you are on the left side being where the technical maturity is not as high and the belief in what technology can do is relatively lower because they don't know what they don't know, if you will, what technology can do from them. So that does create a little bit of a steeper climb, a longer curve to bringing them along the journey in the sense of doing some cutting edge things, which are perceived to be fluff or, a theory in the minds of certain stakeholders. You ask, like, what could those things be? So, for example, automation is one of the major, I would say, initiatives, I think, that can help in general, right? And the fear is that, hey, if I automate this, then I don't need person X, I don't need person Y. What folks lose sight of in that particular scenario is like, hey, instead of losing a headcount, it's more about redeploying the headcount to do higher value stuff so that you are better servicing the end customers and the field. And again, automation comes in various flavors as well. How expansive you are from a business process standpoint that you automate, how expansive you are from your, technology processes. Like there's a lot that can be said in terms of the application of automation.
I see what you're saying in the sense that when you're on the right side being that which those which are technologically mature, they get it. They understand the value of technology because they live in it. So it doesn't take as much convincing to do something technological. But when you're on, someone is so used to pen and paper and you're trying to convince them to use a laptop, actually, in fact, using the laptop will be slower than them using the pen and paper if they've never really used a laptop before. So you have to convince them of investing in the learning to understand it so that it's actually better. And that's where that friction can come in of like, wait, but I don't understand.
Yeah.
So I have to understand and then make the change. It's a bit tough, right?
That's right. So that convincing part is one thing. And then my comment about expectation that when will I begin to reap the benefits making this change? So the learning curve and the adaptation and the change, that adds certain duration. And then once the gears begin to crank, that's when you start to see the value. So there's that. Setting the right expectations is also another key component.
I wonder if you've ever experienced this in your companies, if you've always been on cutting edge companies or sometimes not. How does that feel? Is it sometimes frustrating, or have you learned to be like, take a step back and understand? But I can imagine for me, I'd be like, how could you not see it? Yada, yada, yada. And then just have to settle, you know what I mean? Or take it slower so you know where you could be. How do you feel about that?
So the way I would answer that is, in full transparency, it has helped me mature personally as an individual to realize that, they are not understanding and I need to be patient. I cannot go into my type A mode and say like, nope, now.
Yeah.
So that has definitely been a learning curve, and you are spot on. Those motions have happened, and you need to adapt on how to drive that change.
Honestly, I appreciate. The reason I realized when I asked that question, I went, "Oh, that's kind of a personal question." The way I asked that, so I appreciate you really being transparent and just saying, "Oh, it made me improve as a human being." And I think that's why I like these podcasts so much, is because we get to talk about IT and tech, but really we talk about the human behind the IT and tech and the
100%
complexities that come with that.
And the other, now that you're saying that, the other part, I think, going forward what's going to become more and more important is as systems and solutions get designed, how technology interacts with the humans on the other end is going to be the, key driver, almost like a make or break it type of a component in that solution. Because the proliferation of technology is there in every aspect of our life. And with AI, with automation and everything else in between, how seamless we can be and how we drive that understanding of the machine from a human standpoint and an understanding of the human from a machine standpoint when we design those systems is going to be key as the world evolves.
I think every time we invent something new, there are people who are excited about tech, and then there are people who are scared that it's going to change the way we work forever. People are going to lose their jobs. That's always been what happens with technology advancement.
Yeah.
And so we've always played that game. It's just so prevalent now because of the whole AI can replace, right? And so that fear, at least, I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so we're at a really interesting point in our lives where our humanity is creating something that people are afraid might take away our humanity. And since we're aware of that, we have to be intentional about how we use our technology to ensure that humans.
100%.
I'm rambling now, but you got me on something. So I appreciate
No,
you
I
saying
love
that.
it. I love it.
I appreciate you saying that, for sure. What would you say is kind of like, I guess, is that like one of the only challenges that you've faced or are facing right now in your role? What are some other challenges that you're facing in your role or have faced, and how are you tackling it? How did you tackle it? And what did you learn?
Yeah.
What are you learning?
So, the underlying factor, if I were to summarize in like, hey, that one thing that causes a challenge is the aspect of driving change in behaviors. Right? At the end of the day, whatever that solution is, folks have to adapt in terms of what they were doing yesterday to what they are going to be doing today using this new solution, right? And this challenge compounds when you talk about driving, a transformation that involves changing the point of sale system. The reasons are many, right? Number one, a point of sale system is a revenue collection point, right? So it cannot be broken at any given point in time. So the stakes are high. Challenge number one in that continuum of driving change. Second thing is when you talk about like changing point of sale systems, there's many aspects that hang off of that point of sale system. In our world, it's around the point of sale system in many cases is like the fulfillment center. So you, the customer, paid us at the point of sale system. Now we need to give you a service or a product in return, right? That's what I'm calling fulfillment. So there are many different tentacles tied from a fulfillment standpoint, third-party systems, employee changes, managing the menus or SKUs on the point of sale, etc. Right? And then from a readiness standpoint to plug out the old point of sale, put in the new point of sale in, there's a lot of synchronization that has to go in. And at the end of the day, behind every aspect, there is a human in the picture. So to your point about challenges, how do you drive that orchestration at a scale? Because I have 4,000 stores that I need to do this in. It cannot be 2 stores a day because we'll be doing that for eternity at that pace.
Yeah.
And the longer the program runs, the higher or the more expensive the program becomes for our company, right? So the challenge is how do you drive this orchestration like a well-oiled machine that we can, yes, we start out slow, but then we can go at a speed and do this quickly.
You said something twice that I meant to bring up earlier, and now I'm like, oh, I need to bring this up. I walk into like a Walmart, right? Or just one store. And I'm like, whoa, there's a lot of products that you have to keep in stock and inventory and know where it's at. There's also the all of the technological stuff. So routers, the things people used to communicate across the
That's
store
right.
that you have to keep track of. So I guess phones aren't as relevant, but I mean, you even have laptops in the back, phones in the back. That's one store. You just said
Uh-huh.
4,000. I can't even imagine the difficulty in having visibility into one store. What is it like looking at 4,000? And how do you make sure that, especially, in the role that you're in, and obviously your IT team too, like the bigger IT team in general, looking at all the mobile devices, looking at the internet circuits, looking at what you have to do for your stuff, the point of sale system. How do you keep track of 4,000 stores and all of the things that go into that without losing sight? I mean, I feel like it goes back to your scaling. How do you make sure that you can maintain this size of management?
Right. And that's where, so number one, you're spot on in terms of the moving components, if you will, that have to be the right pegs have to be in the right place for the entire engine to work. I'd say definitely it's challenging, but at the same time, I go back to the basics, meaning to be able to manage something, you need to have visibility into it. If you can't see it, you can't manage it.
Yeah.
So as we looked at, standing this program up, one of the key things was reporting. And how do you make sure that you're reporting on the right things so that the right levers can be moved at the right time to drive that scale and appropriately respond to the conditions that happen in the moment? That has been key. And that's again part of, the rigor and discipline that you drive both from a process standpoint and then help people realize the importance of following the process, having the discipline. And then once, folks begin to see the results of it and the value of it, that's when, the light bulb goes on and the thing takes off.
It's so funny because that is one of those things that it's like when you hear it, we need visibility so we can manage it. It doesn't sound sexy, right? It just doesn't. People are like, oh, okay, whatever. Like that's not a cool technological thing. But I've also experienced or have noticed that it is a light bulb moment because when you actually do it and you realize how much it transforms it can transform your organization because then you can actually manage, keep your costs low, yada, yada, yada. It's like, oh, you can't do anything different. If you can't see it, you can't manage it. What was a huge learning experience you've had in your career that really has, other than you mentioned the whole, you felt like you matured as a person when you realized you had to be more patient. What's another thing like that where you're like, like I didn't do that as well as I could have been. And now I'm going to be better moving forward.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you asked. One of the reputations I've earned through my career is to be the fix-it guy. It all started many, many years back where one of the projects was not going so well and I was brought in to fix it, did that. And since then it's been like, hey, another program not going well, come in, please fix it. And that's what's snowballed. From a learning standpoint, a basic learning has been, which is, I would say, a little hard for technologists to grasp, because we work with machines all the time, is the human aspect. So a big learning was, at the end of the day, we are dealing with people and we are people. No matter how much we interact with machines, we are people. So that's one big learning. The second big learning I would say is how you manage a scope of an engagement is super important, because once you get into the daily details and the stuff, if you will, on a day-to-day level, keeping a conscious effort to keep an eye on the big picture is super important. Because otherwise what tends to happen is change of a scope constantly happens. And by the time you realize that you are over budget or over time, you've lost the battle because the scope has drastically shifted from where you started from an end game standpoint. And then the third thing I would leave you with is, I've talked about it earlier in this conversation as well, is around setting expectations. That is super important from a program management standpoint. Being clear on like what can be done, what can't be done, and making sure that you have the buy-in from the stakeholders on those factors. If not, you have problems. And the way to do that is in a non-emotional manner by placing the facts, if you will, and talk to them. And most of the times I find like people are reasonable and they understand, and that's when you adjust resources or budget and things like that. And, you get to the end game. Actually, there's a final one I would say, especially for large transformations. And that is always keep an eye on the long-term horizon, because one of the things I've seen in my career, especially with large organizations who have a quarter to quarter view from a financial standpoint, many times they have a tendency, because of that short-term view, to kick off these large transformations. But then, because of whatever reasons driven from a street standpoint, those transformations change paces, change hands, change direction, and then don't end up in places where they are supposed to have they were supposed to reach.
Wow. How do you prevent that change of scope creep to the point where it suddenly doesn't accomplish? It's not even where it was when you first planned it. How do you keep to a plan? Why is that such a common issue?
Right. So excellent question. I've seen many times that when projects get initiated, there is this desire to get it started fast. Like, hey, let's just start the program. Let's just start whatever work needs to get going. Let's do it now. Right. And that's driven by like, hey, I'm making this investment. I need to start seeing the results soon. Right. But what that eats into is the strategy and planning phase, establishing a vision, creating a strategy, creating a roadmap, thinking through the pitfalls, thinking through the what ifs, right? And because that gets shortchanged, the repercussions are seen down the line. And while, from a management standpoint, you might get the feeling like, oh, I did good. I got it started. Things are moving. Guess what? From a total cost standpoint for the program, it's much more expensive to fix something had you known to begin with, right? So I strongly, tell my stakeholders that, hey, if you are trying to rush this, don't, because here are the 10 things that can go wrong and probably will go wrong, and we'll end up collectively paying more for it.
So and then again, it goes back to the cost and communicating the value of keeping to it. Because if you start to lose track, it'll be over budget, it'll be over time, and it won't even accomplish what you want it to accomplish. Right. So it's like, hey, we can't deviate. We made this plan. We have to stick to this plan, because the reason why we did this plan is because we could see how cost effective it is. And if we don't follow it, we lose that. We lose it.
That's right. And many times there are situations where, purity and perfection is not the answer, which is fine, because now we go with eyes wide open, fully knowing here are the risks and things that can go wrong. And with the understanding, if they do go wrong, we have a contingency plan or a backup plan or whatever else to mitigate that, right?
Yeah. It's a weird balance though, right? Like you just pointed out, we have to go fast, but also be intentional. We can't move too slowly either.
That's right.
You have to get to a really good point, but you also can't let perfection be the enemy of good. I still don't know how to balance that, honestly, because I've heard both things. Everyone goes, oh, you need to take the time to plan and strategize. But then other people are like, oh, but you just have to go and do and then make mistakes. So I guess it depends on your end goal, right? Or what is trying to be put into place. So that's interesting to me.
Yep. And, so I'm glad that you brought it up, because another factor on where you drive that balance or where does that balance lie is heavily influenced by the culture of the organization. Some organizations have a highly entrepreneurial culture. They may be large, but they're highly entrepreneurial, which means the risk appetite is high. They have deeper pockets, relatively speaking, and so on and so forth. You go and experiment a certain way, move at a certain speed. And there are others who are more conservative from a risk taking point of view, and they move slower.
It's interesting. That's a really good point, actually. I really like that. The final question of the podcast is a looking forward question. And it's both personal and business related. Moving forward, what are kind of your biggest priorities, goals for yourself, for the business? You want to become Tony Stark, Iron Man? You know what I mean? Like, what are those? What's ahead for you?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. So it's been a constant discovery over my last 25 years in my career. I've been picking up skills. At the same time, I've been learning about myself, what I enjoy more, where I can drive more impact and so forth. So in that regard, like I had shared at the start of the call, opportunities to drive higher impact for the organizations that I engage with, that is top of mind. And what that translates into is leadership roles that in a technology organization where you have the ability to move the needle through, vision setting, through driving your strategies, and so on, right? I'm not discounting the fact like, hey, technology is important. Absolutely it is. But how do you use that to drive your tech strategy to begin with so that you are maximizing the ROI as a company that is investing in the technology? And I would characterize that I've seen the good, the bad, the ugly in that regard, where the technology is the technology, but if the contract is not, let's say, shaped the right way, then the whole thing falls apart. So there's many facets to it. And what I excel at is bringing all those facets to life and balancing across those to drive that impact, if you will.
That's awesome. I don't know. I always like it when people recognize their skills and talents and are honest about it and upfront about it, and also have a humility at the same time. And I see that in you. So I just think that's awesome. I wanted to say thank you for an incredible conversation. I think you are very wise and kind of know your stuff and are very, you mentioned a huge part of your job, pretty much your entire job is about communication and learning to listen to needs and learning how to respond to those needs. And I think this podcast is very reflective of your ability to field questions, understand intention, and be able to communicate very clearly. And I learned a lot from you. And I think anyone who listens to this will also learn a lot just because of how clearly and easily you can explain things that you want to talk about. So I just wanted to say thank you for your wisdom. And then finally, thank you for your time and spending time with me and talking for the last however long we have been. It's been an awesome conversation. So thank you again.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jethro, and thanks for the kind words. Absolutely. I'm more than happy to, help others who are looking for, guidance, advice. Happy to help them. So,
yeah. Well, thank you again. I wish you all the best and take care.
We hope you enjoyed this Keeping IT Real episode, and thank you for listening. Make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss a future episode. This podcast is all about celebrating and connecting professional heroes who work hard at IT every day. To continue the conversation and learn how VCOM can help you better buy, manage, and pay for your technology, visit us at vcomsolutions.com. Until next time.